1. Central Washington State, 1893. Isabelle Atwood rode her bicycle along the main street of Comola, pumping with one foot then the other. The tepid fall air fanned her face. The bicycle had emancipated women like nothing else. She no longer had to wait for a man to hitch up a buggy or saddle a horse. Her bloomer bicycle dress with the blousy trousers under the mid-calf length skirt made riding so much easier. No more bunching up her skirt and petticoats to keep the hems from getting caught in the greasy chain. She steered around a chuck hole in the road and wobbled but kept her conveyance and herself upright. Ahead, the White Hotel came into view, and not to disappoint, Grant Dawson sat on the bench out front. He worked as a desk clerk there. A smile broke across his face, and her insides fluttered. She squeezed the brake lever with her right hand and slowed to almost a stop before putting her feet out as the bicycle tilted to one side. Shaking his head, her best friend stood. "Izzy, you're 22. Why do you ride that thing?" He was the only one who called her Izzy. "Because it gives me freedom, and it's fun." She leaned it against the boardwalk railing. "You're gonna get hurt." Like her father and stepmother, Grant worried too much. He lived in a small room at the back of the hotel. He had the early shift at the desk and sometimes got called to help during the night if a problem arose. Though he could afford to rent something bigger, he was saving every penny to buy a house someday. Such a practical man. Isabelle unstrapped the food basket from the back of her bicycle. "I brought lunch." He relieved her of the basket and offered his assistance. She clasped his steady hand, stepped up onto the boardwalk, and sat on the bench, then unpacked the food and held out the bowl of cold fried chicken. Grant chose a drumstick and took a bite. Mmm. She bit into a piece of her own. After polishing off the drumstick, he wiped his hands and mouth on a cloth napkin. "I've been invigorated. I'm ready now." "For what?" "Bringing me lunch usually means you're trying to soften me up for the next young lady you plan to set me up with." Isabelle had nearly exhausted the supply of suitable ladies in town. No one this time. No one was quite right for her childhood friend, but she hadn't given up. The right lady worthy of her best friend was out there, and she would find her. She dropped her half-eaten chicken into the bowl and licked her fingers while she pulled a folded piece of paper out of her bloomer skirt pocket. "Yesterday, I found this wound between the spokes of my bicycle." "What is it?" He picked up the bowl of chicken, gazing into it lovingly, and licked his lips. Men, more interested in food than anything. She unfolded the paper. "This is a love poem." "A what? What are you going to do with that?" "Don't look so scared. I'm going to read it." "You are?" Grant's voice cracked. "Why would you do that?" "I want to share this with you, my friend. Maybe you'll get a little inspiration." He held up one hand. "Oh, no. I'm not sending a cloying love poem to a lady I've never met." "No, silly. It was left for me by a secret admirer." So exciting and romantic. "Let me know what you think." He groaned. "I'll need more nourishment to endure over-sentimental musings written by some confused, lovelorn sap." Grant took another piece of chicken. "It wouldn't hurt you to write a few sweet lines to a lady. Maybe then you would find one who doesn't think you completely emotionless." "I'm not going to be someone I'm not. A lady's got to take me as I am. Or what's the point?" To punctuate his earnest words, he ripped off a big bite and motioned for her to proceed. He made her job of finding him a suitable wife more challenging than it need be. Isabelle cleared her throat. "The rose is red, the violet's blue, the honey's sweet, and so are you." He stared at her sideways, frowning. "Is that it?" She nodded. A few well-chosen words could say so much. Grant made a retching sound. She slapped his arm with the paper. "Don't be like that." "Ow!" He clutched his arm, pretending to be injured. "That isn't even original." He put his chicken-free hand over his heart. "The man is boring, not a brain in his head. You'd be better off filling him with lead." "See, I can do it too." He tore off another bite of chicken. "Stop it, that's not nice." He laughed. She shook her head. You're impossible. He stopped laughing and made an effort to not smile. Do you seriously like this kind of mushy sentimentality? It's not even a very good poem. Shows what you know. It's not about the poem or even if it's any good, but the thoughtfulness of it. Someone I don't know thought enough to secret this onto my bicycle. There's something romantic and enticing about that, and I'm going to find out who he is. Your problem is you're too practical. You could learn a thing or two from him. She held the poem a little higher. Let me guess. You're hoping he leaves you another one of these. Most definitely. Why are you so disparaging? Not disparaging. Realistic. I don't want to see you get hurt. He lowered his head. What about that cowboy you've been talking about? Rancher. He's a cattle rancher. Shane Keegan. Just saying his name made her a little giddy. I hear he has quite a place outside of town. He's still a cowboy. I can't see you with a cowboy stuck out on a ranch all winter. You would be bored inside of a month. Tedious before the honeymoon was over. He'll be gone for weeks at a time, and you'll have nothing to do. And when he is at home, what will you talk about? You have nothing in common with his type. I could find many things to occupy my time. I can sew and bake and read and crochet doilies. He sputtered out a laugh. I don't think ranchers have doilies. A rancher's wife does. If you say so. He chucked his second chicken bone into the trash bin outside the hotel and licked his fingers. So, in all the ladies you've tried to set me up with, why never Adelaide? My half-sister? Oh, no. She is all wrong for you. How so? She's mighty pretty with her blonde hair and alluring round face. I love my sister, but she's a bit selfish and about as deep as a saucer. Adelaide was one of those people who remained immature and naive longer than others. You would literally have nothing to talk about with her. You would die of boredom. Being pretty has to count for something. Her sister was the picture of beauty with ringlets around her face and rosy lips. Isabelle couldn't blame Grant and other men for falling for her, but Isabelle wouldn't subject her good friend to life with Adelaide. Is how a lady looks all men care about? Grant held up a cookie he'd fished out of the food basket. And cooking. Impossible! She threw her hands up. Well, maybe I will arrange something between you and my sister. You're both shallow and self-centered. You deserve each other. Because The Rose is Red has so much depth and is so profound. If you bothered to think about the poem for even a minute, you would know it's not about the color of the rose. It's about the truth of the statement. Not one, not two, but 3 true statements to validate and give extra weight to the 4th, the important one. He squinted at her. You got all of that out of those 4 little lines? I did. And it's not the words themselves, but the fact some gallant man thought to pen them and deliver them is what makes them special. Gallant? He glanced away, then pointed down the street. Speaking of boredom, isn't that your cowboy coming out of the telegraph office? She cast her gaze in that direction. That's him, she sighed. Shane Keegan, a rancher who stood well over 6 feet tall, with a saunter that said he was comfortable with who he was, and a smile that crooked up on one side that could fairly make a lady swoon. And when he tipped his hat and said, "Good day, ma'am," all sense and reason left her. Maybe he's your secret admirer. A rush of anticipation swooped through her at the thought. She'd run into him a few times, saw him at church once or twice, but not regularly. She'd never had a lengthy conversation with him, though she'd like to. Do you think so? She would very much like it if he were the one. Grant shrugged. As good a guess as any. You should go talk to him. Talk to him? You think that's a good idea? Not too forward? A surge of excitement warmed her cheeks. Sure. Ask him what he thinks of dull, sappy poetry. Unless you're scared. She knew a playful taunt when she heard one. Maybe I will. Grant folded his arms. Bet you don't. Why do you say that? I've known you a long time. I've never known you to be daring, except to ride that fool bicycle. You talk about doing exciting things, but you seem content to read about others doing them. He was right. Her head told her to be careful, but her heart told her to be bold. If she took a risk, she might get hurt, either physically or emotionally. She squared her shoulders. I'll do it. What should I say? He spoke in a voice a few octaves higher than his normal one. Tell him what a big, strong man he is. Then bat your eyelashes at him. He clasped his hands together under his chin and batted his own lashes. The rose is red, the violet's blue, the honey's sweet, and so are you. She swatted his arm. You are no help. You could drop your handkerchief and wait for him to pick it up. Seriously, would you fall for that? Because I don't think a man like him would. Why do I even bother asking you anything? Because you know you'll get an honest answer. He pointed down the street. He's getting away. You lost your chance. Maybe she would get an opportunity another day. Shane Keegan stopped near the livery and talked to the sheriff. He's been waylaid. Now or never. Grant elbowed her. Dare she go? No, don't think about it. Just take action. Stuffing the paper back into her pocket, she gulped in a deep breath, grabbed her bicycle, and pedaled down the street, wobbling at first until she got going. She would head over and say hello to the sheriff and pretend not to see Mr. Keegan, at first. Right as she drew near and was about to squeeze the brake lever, a horse spooked, neighed, and stepped backward into her path. She swerved to avoid running into the horse's hindquarter, but put herself on a collision course for Shane Keegan. Oh, dear! Shane Keegan stood outside the livery, talking to Sheriff Ricks, when a shriek cut through the air. Oh, no! Look out! Shane jerked around at the panicky words. A woman on a bicycle careened straight toward him. He jumped back, and as she swooshed past, Shane reacted without thinking and plucked the frantic woman off her bicycle. Though she rested safely in his arms, her vehicle went on alone and crashed into the side of a wagon. Uh-oh. Had he ruined this lady's transportation by plucking its driver off? He had neither meant to grab her nor wreck her bicycle. Are you all right? She turned toward him, her pretty face inches from his. He held her in his arms. He'd just had the misfortune of harassing the affluent Miss Isabelle Atwood. She lived in the upper tier of Camola society, a different class from a saddle tramp like Shane altogether. A polite how do you do was the most he ever expected from someone like her toward someone like him, and she smelled of flowers. Are you all right, Isabelle? Sheriff Ricks asked from somewhere beside him. Miss Atwood stared up at Shane, probably in shock from him grabbing her. I think so. His heart pounded. All he could do was stare. Wisps of brown hair framed her heart-shaped face, clear blue eyes, lips the color of ripe strawberries, and a fetching blush to her cheeks. Of course, a lady was more than her appearance. He shouldn't be holding her, so he set her down but kept her in his arms. I want to make sure you're steady on your feet before I turn you loose. She was likely fine. He was the unsteady one, using her shakiness as an excuse to be close to her. Strangely, she didn't pull away from him in disgust. I'm quite well, fit as a fiddle, in fact. She almost seemed pleased to be near him. Couldn't be. The sheriff cleared his throat. Good thing Mr. Keegan caught you. Oh, right. Shane wasn't alone with this alluring young filly. She looked from the sheriff to Shane. Did you snatch me off my bicycle? He offered her a lopsided grin. I guess I did. He had not so much caught her as acted out of self-preservation. When someone was heading straight for him, he either needed to duck out of the way, stop them, or punch them. Well, he had known enough not to punch the lady, and he had been too caught off guard to duck, so he'd done the only thing he could, wrapped his arms around her. she did fit nicely there. She gifted him with a smile that could make a man do almost anything for her. "Thank you for rescuing me." Rescue? Is that what she thought he'd done? "I didn't want to see you get hurt. I can't rightly stand the sight of blood." Now she was going to think he needed mollycoddling. "Not a scratch on me, thanks to you." Was she flirting with him? Sheriff Ricks tapped him on the shoulder. "You can let go of her now." Shane released Miss Atwood and glanced toward her bicycle. "Let me get that for ya." He walked over to the corpse of her contraption and wheeled it back, the front tire wobbling. "It appears to be damaged." "Great going, Shane. You sure know how to impress a lady, destroy her property, and tell her you're a milksop." "I'm afraid that's my fault. I can't help but feel if I hadn't been so hasty, you probably had everything well in hand." "I can assure you, I did not have it well in hand. The horse spooked, and I swerved. If not for you, I would have been in a heap right along with my bicycle." Nice of her to spare his feelings by being polite. "If you say so, these things can be dangerous. You should be more careful." He should not have criticized her. He wasn't handling this situation well at all. He found her riding a bicycle endearing. It showed an adventurous side to the fair Miss Atwood. She gripped the handlebars. "I will. Thank you very much for retrieving my bicycle and for rescuing me." "Mighty welcome, ma'am. Miss." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'm fairly new in town. I recently acquired the old Bristol ranch. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Though he'd asked around and knew much about Miss Isabelle Atwood. "I'm Shane Keegan." "I know. I've heard your name mentioned before. Townsfolk talk." The sheriff suppressed a soft chuckle. "Shane, this is Miss Atwood." Shane tipped his hat. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Atwood." "So very pleased." "Do call me Isabelle." Bold move to offer him the use of her first name. But he preferred ladies who didn't put on pretentious airs. He felt the right side of his mouth automatically hitch up. "A beautiful name for a beautiful lady. Very pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Isabelle." But his delight was short-lived when he glanced up the street. He motioned. "Your fella's waiting for ya." He had seen her with the hotel clerk often. Isabelle turned toward where he'd indicated. "Grant? He's not my fella. He's only a friend. We've been palling around since we were children." Not her beau? Strange. He could have sworn the pair were sweet on each other. But good news he wasn't. "Very pleased to hear that." Her smile emboldened him. "Would the lady think it too brazen of me to inquire if she has a beau?" Her widening smile encouraged him even more. She wasn't as unapproachable as he'd imagined. The lady would think it quite brazen. He'd stepped in it now. "And no, she does not have a beau." Though she'd made a point to let him know she was unattached, she glanced away shyly. Would the lady consider eating with a brazen rancher, say, Monday noon, White Hotel dining room? He should have waited for her to answer the question before giving a time and place. "Lunch, Monday?" She paused as though thinking. "I'll have to consult my social calendar and let you know Sunday after church." Was that a delayed no? Or the game ladies played when they feigned disinterest or pretended to be neutral to string a fellow along? Make him wait in anticipation of her answer. Drive him mad with wonder. He folded his arms. How could he get out of the rendezvous and save face for both of them? "I'm not going to be able to make it into town on Sunday." Her expression shifted from playful to disappointment. He hurried on. "I usually do some sort of Bible reading and such for my men, who would never cross the threshold of a church. So, I'll tell you what. I'll be at the White Hotel's dining room at noon on Monday. If you show up to eat with me, I'll consider it as the good Lord smiling down on me." A graceful way for her to back out. "And if I don't show up?" What he expected would happen, but still disappointing. "I'll be eating alone. A man's still gotta eat." He was not up for her inevitable rejection in person, and so turned to the sheriff. "I'll talk to you later." He tipped his hat to Miss Isabelle and strode away, resisting the urge to run. Why was talking to ladies so nerve-wracking? She was just a person, just like him. No, she was nothing like him. She was refined. He was a dusty cowboy. Come Monday, he'd be eating alone. Isabelle watched Jane Keegan saunter away. She'd received several smiles, 2 cowboy saunters, 2 hat tips, and a lunch invitation, as well as being rescued and held in his arms. Strong arms. She sighed. Quite a productive interaction. She'd wanted to accept his invitation right away, but it would be considered poor etiquette for a lady to answer too quickly. Could make a man think she was desperate. Didn't a lady need to seem elusive to keep a man's interest? Yet, he'd been the elusive one and had piqued her interest. She nodded at the sheriff. "Good day, Sheriff Ricks." She walked her wobbly bicycle back up the street to the hotel, her insides as unsteady as the wheel. Grant frowned. "You made quite an impression on that scoundrel." "Scoundrel? He was very chivalrous." "Like a perfectly set romance novel." "Chivalrous? I saw the way he grabbed you. Opportunist, if you ask me. You have to watch out for his kind." "Well, I didn't ask you." She didn't want to talk about Mr. Keegan anymore, and rocked her bicycle forward. "The front tire is bent. Will you help me fix it?" "You mean, will I fix it?" "Please." He shook his head. "If you are going to insist on riding this thing, then you need to learn to repair it. We can work on it together." She smiled. "Thank you." He smiled back. "When have I ever been able to say no to you? Park it around back by Hurley's workshop. Meet me here in the lobby Saturday morning." That's what she liked about Grant. He didn't treat her like a helpless female. He taught her how to do many things like fish, balance the hotel ledgers, ride a horse, astride no less, and even shoot a gun. She'd only done that once. The sound had hurt her ears, but she'd hit the target he'd set before her. After parking her bicycle, Isabelle walked home, then headed into the 2-story house by way of the kitchen entrance. She snatched a small handful of raisins from a ceramic canister on the work table. Molly, the cook, tisked at her. "You'll spoil your supper." Isabelle chewed and swallowed. "No, I won't. Nothing could spoil today." She had a social engagement with Shane Keegan. Marguerite stalked in from the front hall. "Finally, you're home! Where have you been?" Even her stepmother couldn't spoil her buoyant mood. "My bicycle got banged up. I had to take it to be repaired." "That thing is a menace!" "You're a young lady, not a hooligan." "Not to worry. You won't be riding that any more." "Why not?" "It's mine." Isabelle's bicycle gave her freedom. That it irritated Marguerite was a bonus. "Because it's unladylike. Come into the parlor." Her stepmother strode back the way she'd come. "Your father and I need to talk to you." Isabelle tagged along in her wake. She didn't like the superior tone in Marguerite's voice. It always meant trouble for Isabelle. About what? She stopped short over the parlor's threshold. Her father stood by the fireplace with a worried expression. Her 18-year-old half-sister sat on the settee, picking at a thread on her sleeve cuff. Something menacing hung in the air. "What's this all about?" Her stepmother eased herself into a wing-back chair. "Your life is about to change. All our lives are about to change." "Change? How?" "We've arranged a marriage for you." Isabelle sucked in a breath and choked on the air. She coughed several times before she could speak. "What? To whom? I don't want to marry someone I'm not in love with." Right now, she wasn't in love with anyone. "Mr. Oliver Mallory." "The banker? He's so old." "Watch your tone." Marguerite snapped. "He's only 36. That's not so old." Isabelle shook her head. "Why would I agree to marry him?" Her stepmother, sitting on the edge of her seat, didn't blink. "It's for the good of the family." Marry a banker? For the good of the family? Isabelle shifted her gaze to her father. Are we in financial trouble? He gave a snort of dismissive laughter. Don't be silly. Then why would you want me to marry a banker I don't love for the good of the family? When her father remained silent, Isabelle turned to Marguerite. This had to be her doing. Why? It seems our precious Adelaide has gotten herself into a little bit of trouble. Her stepmother's voice wavered slightly on the last word, and she fidgeted with her handkerchief, tugging at the corner. A sure sign something had unnerved her. She rarely ever got rattled. What kind of trouble? Marguerite's jaw worked back and forth, and her lips parted as if to speak. Isabelle shifted her gaze to her sister. What kind of trouble are you in? Adelaide chewed furiously on her bottom lip as she spoke. I'm kind of... Her father finally blurted out the words. Your sister has gotten herself in the family way. What? Isabelle sat on the settee next to her sister. How did this happen? Adelaide didn't have a beau, did she? She was barely 18. Old enough to get married, but still young. He said he loved me. Who? An odd animal-like sound came from her sister. Marguerite narrowed her eyes. She won't tell us, but that really doesn't matter. The boy would never be suitable for her. You will marry Oliver Mallory and pretend to be expecting right away. When we can no longer conceal Adelaide's condition, she will remain in seclusion for the duration of her time. After the child is born, you'll say it's yours, and my dear, sweet Adelaide will be free of this burden. While saddling Isabelle with it. Unbelievable! Has Mr. Mallory agreed to this? He owes your father a favor. Probably not one this big that will last the rest of his life. Why me? Why doesn't Adelaide marry him? You're the oldest. You must marry first. Adelaide is too young. Obviously not. Isabelle turned an imploring gaze on her father. Say I don't have to do this. I think your mother knows what's best. He looked resigned. Isabelle wasn't. This couldn't be her fate. First of all, Marguerite wasn't Isabelle's mother, but Isabelle wasn't allowed to voice that fact. Hers had died when she was very young, and Marguerite never truly treated Isabelle as a daughter. Second, her stepmother didn't know what was best for Isabelle, and third, her father didn't argue with his wife. Marguerite wouldn't let him. He always gave in to her because it was easier. I won't do it. You can't make me. Marguerite raised one pale eyebrow. Can't we? That look sent a cold shiver down Isabelle's back. Why must I pay for Adelaide's mistake? Because she has a bright future. I've been in correspondence with Lord Blaine in Boston. He's interested in meeting your sister and will make a wonderful match for her. You wouldn't deny your sister the opportunity to marry a titled man, would you? Don't be selfish. Think of her future. Her stepmother was attempting to arrange a marriage for Adelaide with a lord, so Isabelle was to be the sacrificial lamb to sweep Adelaide's transgression under the rug? Adelaide sat next to her on the settee with her shoulders hunched and arms crossed over her stomach. All things work together for the good, and this marriage is for the good of the whole family. Don't be selfish, thinking only of yourself. Isabelle hated it when Marguerite spouted scripture for her own benefit. She understood her stepmother's need to protect her daughter, but to sacrifice Isabelle to do it wasn't fair. She didn't have much choice when father sided with his wife. Was there any way for her to get out of this?